Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. My name is Dex and this is Created by Dex. Now in today's video guys, I want to talk a little bit about my camera system, the Sony A7 III, and I want to share a little bit of my likes and dislikes about this camera system. Before I get down into the video though guys, let me give you a little bit of a backstory as to where I'm coming from in terms of my own camera usage. Now I've been a Nikon shooter since 2012. My first camera was a Nikon D3100 and for the most part I was pretty happy with what Nikon was offering. However, throughout my process of growth as a creative, I started to realize that the camera system I was using wasn't necessarily able to deliver everything that I wanted from it. So in 2018 or thereabout, I started to do a little bit more research into what Nikon was offering and also what other camera brands were offering to see what was on the market and what I could upgrade to. Now around that period, Nikon was in the process of releasing their Z6 and Z7 line of cameras, and I thought that well, this may be the time to make a transition from DSLRs to mirrorless. Now when I'm looking into a new camera system, there are a few things that it has to have guys. Two of these things which are very important are a great autofocus system and also redundancy. It must have backup. Now as a wedding and portrait photographer, backup is very important for me. And on a wedding day, my camera has to have 2 card slots so I can shoot with some amount of redundancy. The challenge with Nikon was that when they released the Z6 and Z7, it only had 1 card slot. So I started to look outside of Nikon. Even though they do have other cameras which are pretty nice, they do have DSLRs, I was more caught by the technology that I saw in the mirrorless systems. So I started to look at Canon, Fujifilm, and these other companies to see what they were offering at the time. Canon at that point only had a camera with 1 card slot as well, and Fujifilm was for the most part crop censored, so I wanted to stay with a full frame line. Then I started to look at Sony and what they were offering in terms of their camera system, and after much detailed research and delving into their system, I made a decision to purchase the Sony A7 III. And I must say it's been a good journey since then. This has been my main camera system. I still do have the Nikon D750, but it's now my secondary camera as I make the transition over to the Sony system. So now that you know my backstory guys, I'm going to talk to you about some of my likes and also my dislikes of the Sony A7 III. Sony's autofocus system is impressive. Now, I'd already done all of my research, I'd already seen how great it was, but having shot with Nikon for many years and knowing that their autofocus system was pretty good, I did not know what exactly to expect from a mirrorless system. But I can tell you that the first time I placed this camera to my eye, I found it to be very snappy. There wasn't a lot of hunting or hesitation in terms of capturing photos, and I really appreciated that. Now, one of the things which was big for me and which I loved about this autofocus system is that the autofocus points are spread over the entire frame. They're almost covering the entire frame, guys. I love that, especially because when I was using Nikon before, the autofocus points were all stacked in the center. So in terms of the types of shot that I like to do, which is mostly placing persons in the thirds or just something more unique, I'd have to probably focus then recompose. Now, if you know anything about that technique, there are a lot of times when you may not get the shot as how you want it because the technique is not perfect. However, with the Sony A7 III, I could literally put my subject in almost any area of the screen and the autofocus would just work. Okay guys, so while I was researching this camera, I found that Sony had this thing called eye autofocus. And originally I thought, okay, this is a gimmick. I may or may not use this on a wedding day because I need reliable autofocus and I'm not sure that this will deliver. So when I originally bought the camera, although I was fascinated by what it could do, I was not sure that I wanted to use it on a wedding day or on any paid shoot. I wasn't sure I could trust eye autofocus. Well guys, it's been 2.5 years thereabout and I can tell you that the eye autofocus on this camera is excellent. I use it on every shoot. Weddings, portrait shoots, corporate shoots, commercial shoots. I'm using this thing for everything. So autofocus for me guys makes my job much easier in terms of acquiring focus of the eyes. Once that little box comes up at the eye, I'm almost certain that I've acquired focus, and that's a big thing for me. So now in terms of trying to verify whether or not the eyes are in focus, I'm more concerned about composition and the overall framing of my shot. I'm now focused on getting the shot exactly where I want it. The electronic viewfinder guys. What can I say about the EVF? Well, Originally, I wasn't sure I would like the EVF. Similar to their autofocus system and the eye autofocus, I wasn't sure whether or not I would appreciate having an electronic viewfinder over an optical viewfinder. Especially having had an opportunity to use an EVF in the past, I wasn't sure how quickly I'd get accustomed to it or if I'd really love it. But what I will say, guys, is that now 2 years after I'm completely sold on EVFs, I don't want to use an optical viewfinder again. Every camera should have an EVF. I'm not saying I wasn't comfortable with optical viewfinders. I was okay with changing my settings, but being able to have the ease of knowing that exactly what you're seeing on your screen is what you're getting, it really helped with my photography. And I can say also being able to do a preview of the photos that I'm capturing in the EVF also helps with not having to move the camera from my face. Now I must say, I appreciate the weight difference of carrying around the A7 III as compared to a DSLR, especially on a wedding day. Now I generally would carry around 2 cameras on a wedding day, and it can be significantly heavy and also very taxing on the body when you have to be carrying around 2 cameras for 8 to 12 hours. Now, I'm a strong guy, but generally I find that having a lighter camera can be a little bit more helpful, especially at the end of the wedding day when your back starts to hurt and all these things start to bother you. I find also that it helps with the wrist, because I had started to develop a wrist issue having carried around a camera, or a heavy camera I should say, on a wedding day consistently. So having the option of having a smaller camera and also having less weight is really big for me, especially on a wedding day, guys. So I really appreciate the Sony A7 III for the weight factor. So one of the great things about mirrorless cameras is the ability to be able to customize buttons and different settings to your liking. I love that about the Sony A7 III, especially coming from a Nikon DSLR where I never had that much room for customization. Most of the buttons on the Sony A7 III are customizable, and what I did originally when I was transitioning was set most of the buttons to be similar to what I would be accustomed to on the Nikon system. Now it doesn't mean that they became the same camera. They are completely different in terms of button placement. What it did allow for me though was to become much more acquainted with the camera in a much shorter period. In the past, Sony has had a lot of horror stories where the battery life is concerned. If you do a little bit of research, you'd find out their previous cameras had really bad battery life. What I've found with this particular system is that Sony seems to have done something wonderful with their batteries, because I can't really get through 2 batteries on a wedding day. I've never gotten through 2 batteries on a wedding day. And I generally use a battery grip, so I find that the batteries, they last forever. So I would say kudos to Sony, and it's something I really like about this camera. As I mentioned earlier in this video, redundancy is huge for me. Especially as a paid professional, I don't think I should be going on a shoot without some amount of redundancy or some amount of backup. Now, this doesn't mean that things won't go wrong, but the probability of 2 cards failing on a wedding day or on a shoot day is very unlikely. So I appreciate that Sony placed 2 card slots in this camera and that they allow for redundancy. I must say that I love the images that come out of this camera. Now, I've used Nikon in the past as mentioned, and most of my Nikon cameras, as far as I know, delivered exceptionally where image quality is concerned. I don't think I took a step back when I bought this camera, and that's one thing I'm very happy about. I definitely can say that I find the images to be pretty easy to edit, and I definitely love the image quality. So I know this is a like and dislike video, however I created a neutral category because I found that these are a few things which I neither like nor dislike about this camera. Let me talk about those. Now this story of color science is neutral to me, and I'll tell you why. I find that everyone has their own preference when it comes on to colors and color science. What I did find challenging though when researching this camera was that most persons were saying that the color science was the worst. What I found over the years though is that different camera brands tend to lean to different colors. Canon generally will lean towards the reds, Nikon towards the blues, and Sony I found leans a little bit towards the greens. So what I do as a photographer who's always shooting raw is in post I make the necessary adjustments. So for me, it's all about preference here, guys. Now this in particular could easily have been a dislike, especially being a photographer who used DSLRs in the past. The Sony A7 III was a little bit of a workaround in order to get accustomed to. The ergonomics for me are not the best. I can't say it's the best camera ergonomically that I've used. It's not the best camera I've held. However, what I've mentioned is that adding a battery grip to this camera really helps with the ergonomics of this camera. Now this really fascinated me, especially as a wedding photographer and with my desire to be like a fly on the wall at a wedding. However, my reason for putting this in the neutral category is because, well, I don't use it a lot. I really use silent shooting. And the main reason for that is that the shutter on this camera is pretty quiet. So I haven't found any need to really use silent shooting. However, on the days when I have used it, I found it to be very effective in terms of not letting everyone know you're taking photos. Now, if you've ever researched the Sony A7 III, you would find that one of the main things that most people dislike about this camera is the menu system. Now I know there are many persons out there who have used Sony cameras in the past and have gotten used to the menu system and know they like it. But originally when I took up this camera and started to go through the menu system, I was completely confused. Guys, this system is so difficult to understand. I don't find that it's very user-friendly as compared to other camera systems. This was one of the things I really disliked about this camera. Something as simple and as useful as formatting a memory card, guys, took some amount of work. One of the things though that really helped me with this menu system was being able to create a My Menu setup. Now Sony did create a part of the menu known as My Menu, which allowed you to be able to place your most used menu items. What this did for me was allow me to be able to get back to these menu items much quicker and made my experience better. Now guys, just a note, Sony has updated their menu system. Their new menu system has been released with the Sony A7S III. However, Sony has stated that they will not be passing on this new menu system to the A7 III. So what I found over the years is that instead of using the LCD to assess whether my photo looks exactly where I want it, I'd use the EVF because I find it to be a little bit more accurate than the LCD. I do know though that one of the reasons why they may have not placed the best LCD in this camera was because of the cost. That's understandable, but the LCD is not necessarily something that I like about this camera. I don't think I've ever cleaned a DSLR sensor in the past. I've never had to clean a DSLR sensor. But having had the A7 III, I've had to be concerned about sensor dust. Having a DSLR means that you have a mirror that's in front of your sensor. With a mirrorless camera, there's no mirror. So the possibility of microparticles of dust getting onto your sensor are much greater than before. So I've had to purchase a kit, which I've left a link to in the description if you want to consider purchasing one as well, to clean my camera sensor, which I hadn't done before. It's not a biggie to do it. For me, it's not a huge task. However, it's one thing that I probably didn't want to do that I have to do with this camera. So that's it guys, those are my likes and dislikes about this camera system. Now, is it the best camera in the world? I don't think so. But is it the worst? No. I'm not sure if there's any perfect camera on the market. What I will say though guys, is if you're planning to purchase this camera or any other camera, if you're switching over to a different brand, do the necessary research and also be open-minded about what you may see and what you may experience. Also guys, if you want to learn a little bit more about the A7 III or if you have a few questions, please feel free to leave a comment or you can shoot me a message on IG. I'll be happy to answer them. Guys, I want to thank you so much for joining me here on Created by Dex, and I'll see you in the next one.